Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows, and here's the first half of one of my new American Montage interviews. This time around on American Montage, we are talking about a very special group of women, not only here in the U.S., but around the world. What if you were told that you could be a teacher, but you had to give up just about everything else? You'd be given board and room and medical care and a stipend, but that was it. And you were never told where you were going to be serving until the day before you were assigned there. Well, that's the way it is for many nuns. But in many ways, had it not been for the nuns who devoted their lives to Catholic education and all other causes, including hospital work, there would not have been a parochial school system in this country, nor a lot of Catholic hospitals. I went through Catholic schools for 12 years in Indiana, and one of the nuns who would be sent to my high school right after I left was Sister Marie Kevin. Now, when I was in Catholic schools, we never knew the nuns' last names. That's not the case now. Sister Marie Kevin and later her boss will be talking to us from the headquarters of the Sisters of Providence in St. Mary of the Woods, Indiana. Sister Marie Kevin, I was mentioning there that we never used to know the nuns' last names.
My last name is Tighe, spelled Tighe, just like Kevin Tighe, who's out in California, the actor. He writes to me occasionally. I had 5 older sisters, but I always say I'm the last grape on the Tighe vine. All of my older sisters have died.
I guess the actor must have been Googling around on the internet for his own name and came up with your name because there are, well, parts of them are identical. Sister Marie Kevin, when you decided as a very young woman that you wanted to give up the things of the world, as it were, and devote your life to living under the strict rules of being a nun, how has that felt for you? How did that all turn out?
I don't know how to explain how right it felt, but it did. But I knew that I still had not made a final decision when I first arrived. I could have changed my mind at any point in time. But as time went on, I felt more and more as if this was the life I was called to live.
Sister, you certainly served during what we could call the heydays of Catholic education. Very few lay teachers, almost all the teachers, nuns and priests. What was the focus back then? What did you spend most of your time thinking about and doing as a Catholic school teacher?
My first thing was clearly academic. And so I think that we followed the exact academic studies that were required of any teacher in public school. We took the same courses if we were intending to be an elementary teacher, for example. If we were going to be a specialized teacher in some field in high school immediately, we would pursue that degree, say biology or chemistry. Our studies were the same as anyone preparing for the same kind of career.
I guess it would be impossible to calculate just how many students you had over the decades. Do many of them still stay in contact with you?
I was very interested in that thought because not long ago I received a letter from a fellow that I taught in the 8th grade in 1963. He's now president of the Indiana Oxygen Company. His grandfather founded it. His father was president. Now he's president. He called and asked me, he wrote to me, first of all, and said, I think he was trying to butter me up. He said, I've been bragging about my 8th grade teacher to my book club. He said, I belong to a book club of men who've decided that they want to read books instead of watch movies. And we are reading a book now called The Third Miracle, and we want to know if you would meet with us to discuss it when we've completed it. So he drove over from Indianapolis and picked me up and took me over, and I spent an evening, the whole evening with 11 men, and no women in the group. They don't invite their wives to this book club for some reason. It was a very enjoyable evening, and especially enjoyable to meet Wally Brandt again. I had seen him only once since 1963.
Sister, one of the things I remember from my time in Catholic schools is the outfit, the habit, if you will, that your order of nuns wore. When I was in first grade, they were very restrictive. You had no peripheral vision. And then the dress code, if you will, loosened up to where you didn't have all that encumbering cloth and starch that you wore. I was told it was not only to make you look more modern, but it also, the earlier habit, had prevented you from driving. Did you enjoy this change to a more casual outfit over the years?
I did, personally, because I feel that what the habit said to people was that these are the people in the Catholic Church who are supposed to be good and holy. The habit had a story. Everybody in the Catholic Church is called to be good and holy. And to be singled out so drastically by such radical dress, to me at that time, I don't think I thought of it when I entered the community at all. But as times changed, as the world changed, I began to see it differently. So I had no problem at all in changing from a habit to regular clothing.
I remember one of the great stories told by one of my favorite teachers, Sister Michaela, who you know very well, whom I wanted to have on the program, but she wouldn't do it. Michaela told me that one time she was riding on a bus, and a girl was sitting next to her who obviously had never gone to Catholic schools and didn't really understand who nuns really were, and was looking at this clothing that Sister Michaela was wearing, and she said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And Sister Michaela said no. And the question came out not really what the girl wanted to ask. She said, "What was your name when you were still alive?" Sister Marie Kevin, of course, I only knew you through your work at my old high school, but in looking at your biographical information, you have done quite a lot of things and been sent on some very different assignments over the years.
I really have enjoyed everything that I have had to do. I was kind of moved from one thing to another. I started out teaching 7th grade, and then I found myself teaching 4th grade. And that was not bad, but that was only for 2 years. And then I was back in 7th grade, and then 8th grade. And then I was an elementary principal, and then I was a high school principal. And then I had a variety of positions since that time. But somehow I was able to adjust and accept and rejoice in every one of those. I don't want to sound too unrealistic. It does sound unrealistic when you're happy with everything you're doing, but that's the way it was. The hardest part of my assignment is being now 87 years old and having to slow down.
Sister, you are pretty much now ensconced at St. Mary of the Woods in Indiana, but in the earlier days of your career, like all the other members of your order, you got moved around a lot. I would think when you get advance notice that you're going to be leaving a school you love and going 3 states away, it must have been kind of gut-wrenching to have to follow those orders.
There was no advance notice. The only ones who got advance notice were those who were going to be named principal and superior. They were told ahead of time. Everybody else came to the church and sat in the pew while the Archbishop read what we call the obedience list. And he would start out with Indiana, and you knelt until your name was called. So if you were not going to Indiana, you kept kneeling. And then came Illinois. And I don't know the exact order of the states, but Oklahoma and California and Massachusetts were called. And as they were called, you know, your name was either there or not there, but it was almost always there. Some people would accidentally mishearing it and have to go later and find out where they were going. But that's how we found out where we were going. It was always the day before we left for our missions that we received this, what we called our obedience, what we were told to do. We'd leave the church and someone had tacked up in the hall a list of all of the buses that were leaving and what time they were going and what trains you were going to take, and all of that was all in the hall. And the next day you were off.
Wow, that was never explained to me, that you did not know ahead of time where you were going. It almost sounds like the military.
Yes, it very much is like was like the military.
Sister, later in your career, you were chosen to take on a very important job. Mother Theodore, who founded the Sisters of Providence, was a very holy woman, and over the years, your order felt that she should be recognized by the Catholic Church as blessed, or eventually maybe even recognized as a saint. Can you tell us about the role you played in recent decades in pushing the Church to recognize what a great person Mother Theodore was?
I simply was asked to come back to St. Mary of the Woods to be called promoter of the cause, someone who would try to further it by telling people about Mother Theodore. So my first work was really talking about Mother Theodore. Then I was, shortly after that, was given the title vice postulator. A postulator is a man in Rome, and the word postulator means one who is asking. So the postulator lived in Rome, almost always was a priest or a bishop, but in 1994, our Superior General had appointed a layman who had studied canon law as our postulator, and then there has to be here at St. Mary of the Woods a vice postulator, somebody who can give him the information that he needs. And so I worked with him for several years, but I came into the cause at a time where I always say I cannot take a lot of credit because the hard work had already been accomplished. One of our sisters had written a statement on Mother Theodore's heroic virtue, probably a book about 6 times thicker than any large city's telephone book, in which she described Mother Theodore's life and how she lived. That's the hardest part. When that was approved, Mother Theodore was given the title Venerable. Then there had to be 2 signs from God, not signs from Mother Theodore, strictly speaking, because we don't believe that the saints work miracles. Only God can intervene in the laws of nature and change things. So we had to have 2 examples of how persons were healed of some illness, cured in some way, in a manner that's not explainable medically. When I came in 1996, I began, and in 1997, Mother Theodore was declared venerable.
So I guess in a way this got Mother Theodore on the Vatican's radar in order to eventually investigate her life more and to get her higher honors?
We had sent to Rome a miracle that we thought was a miracle, a case of one of our sisters who had written the first biography of Mother Theodore. We had gone through all the process of preparing that and sending the account of that to Rome, but we would appoint a postulator, and he would serve maybe 2 or 3 years and then be made a bishop and sent away someplace. Then we'd appoint another one, and we had to do that over a period of about 94 years. We did it 10 times, so that all these materials passed from one postulator to the other over that period of time. And it wasn't until 1998 that we appointed a layman who was not going to be made a bishop, not sent away. He read them all and felt they were very worthy of consideration, and he submitted them to the first group of theologians and cardinals in Rome that had to approve it. And when that was formally approved and sent to the Holy Father, then Mother Theodore was declared blessed.
Which then is a major step on the way to being recognized as a saint.
But it had been introduced by the first bishop of Indianapolis in 1909, And it took until 2006, just a few years short of 100 years, before she was named saint.
Well, now that I understand that, I have a better understanding of why there was such frustration. Even when I was in Catholic schools in the 50s and 60s, we used to pray that Mother Theodore would eventually be made a saint. And here I should, for those who don't know the process, not say that she was made a saint. She was recognized as having led an exemplary life and now is in heaven.
That was very well said. Dennis, I'm proud of you and your Catholic education, because that's exactly true. Saints are not made. And we know that there are some people that attribute the whole process to, they think it's done only for money's sake. That's not true. It's done to remind the rest of us that all of us are called to holiness of life. That's why we're here. That's what life's for, to show our love and devotion to God. And that's what Mother Theodore did by everything that she did, by teaching the children, by caring for the sick poor in their homes, by taking care of orphans. Her life was spent in showing the love of God, actually being the love of God for other people. So she was not made a saint, but a thorough study of her life was done. Everything that she wrote, everything that she said, everything that she did, all the various works that she accomplished, that was all examined. And after there were two signs from God that were named and recognized officially as miracles, and a panel of doctors and theologians had to examine all this. If any of the doctors saw a reason that the cure took place because of medical treatment, it was thrown out. And that happens, we know now today, over and over again. Miracles are proposed miracles are submitted, but they're not accepted because some set of doctors examined it and they said this is medically explainable.
So what we have then is a situation where the Vatican has to make darn sure that any intercession on behalf of someone, in this case your founding mother, Mother Theodore, that anything that relates to a health item is something genuine through prayer and not something done medically. Take us back, if you will, to that first instant that you showed the Vatican to try to prove that Mother Theodore was a person who was capable of doing some great works even after her death.
Sister Mary Theodosia was the community historian and archivist when Bishop Chittard, the first bishop of Indianapolis, came over here and asked the Mother General, who was Sister Mary Cleophas at the time, asked her to have a sister write the life of Mother Theodore. So Sister Mary Theodosia was the one who wrote the first biography. She finished it in 1906. Shortly after that, she herself, the sister who wrote the book, was diagnosed with serous carcinoma, a severe form of breast cancer. She had a radical mastectomy in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1907. You can imagine what the surgery was like at that time. As a result of it, she could no longer use her left arm. It was rigid at her side. She additionally had a large abdominal tumor the doctors said they couldn't touch because of her poor condition. Mother Theodore, by this time, had been removed from the cemetery and brought down to the lower part of our church where she was given a place of honor. And Sister Mary Theodosia went down to pray there one night, and she said, I went down to pray not for myself, but for another sister who is sick. She named her. And then she said, I said to myself, I wonder if Mother Theodore has any power with God. Now, that was very good theology. She didn't say, I wonder if Mother Theodore has any power. I wonder if she has any power with God. In other words, I wonder if I'd ask her if she would ask God. That's what we call intercessory prayer. And she said, when I said those words, I didn't hear anything outside myself, but within myself, the words were very clear, "Yes, she has." And she said, it startled me, and I was afraid I was going to see something, so I just started up the stairs. And I stopped on the landing to get my breath, and the second time the sensation came over me, "Yes, she has power with God." And she said, I went on up to my room and I tried to distract myself. I had an article due at a publisher the next morning, and I had to finish it that night. And the lights all went out at 9 o'clock, so she lit a candle, and she wrote until 1:15. When she finished it, she went to bed. At 4 o'clock, the lights all came back on, because that's when all the sisters were supposed to get up. And she said, when the lights came on at 4 o'clock, after 3 hours sleep, I had this feeling, this wonderful sensation of feeling completely healed. And I got out of bed and started spreading my covers when I realized suddenly that my left arm, which had been rigid for 20 months, by this time was now perfectly normal. The tumor was gone, and I had to pull my skirt over 5 inches and pin it to keep it up. Then she went out to the pump and pumped 2 buckets of water and carried it in. I guess they had to do that in those days for they didn't have good plumbing. And then she said, I went to the chapel and made the way of the cross around to every station. And then after morning prayer, I went to the Superior General to tell her that the tumor was gone and my arm was no longer rigid. Now, that miracle took place in the early 1900s. And a medical panel came here to St. Mary of the Woods, and a group of theologians, and they examined it, and they wrote it up and sent it, and that was the one that was passed from one to the other for almost 100 years. But finally it was approved in 1998, and she was declared blessed. Then we had to have one more sign from God. And this was a man who worked for us. He was our facilities manager, and he had had cataracts on both eyes. When the doctor operated on the first one, it healed quickly, no problem. After a while, the first eye began to swell and droop, was red, was painful all the time, and he couldn't see. And his wife was a registered nurse, and so she had encouraged him to go back to this doctor, and he went back to the doctor who had done the surgery for 10 treatments. And after the 10th treatment, the doctor said, I'm sorry, but there's no more that I can do, so I'm sending you to Indianapolis to a specialist. And when he went there, the specialist said, well, given the condition of your eye at this point, it would be very serious to try to do a cornea transplant. When he said cornea transplant, I knew that was from a cadaver, and I don't think I wanted it. And he said, but I went home, who's the nurse, and she said, let's wait. So he said, we waited, and 2 months went by, and 3 months went by, and he said, I was getting very distressed and depressed. He said, one day I had a meeting at Providence Center, and I came out and I walked down the hallway past the church, and I heard someone playing the organ, and I stopped, and I said, maybe I should pray. And then he said, but I'm not a Catholic. I don't belong to any church. But he said, I was so distressed that I walked into the church, and I sat down, and I just loved the prayer that he said. He said, I just said, Mother Theodore, this is your house, and I'm your servant. And then he said, I corrected myself, and I said, no, I'm more like one of your family. And if you could help me, I'd really appreciate it. But if you can't, that's okay. And he said, when I finished the prayer, I had this wonderful feeling of peacefulness. I went home that night, and I didn't even tell my wife that I had stopped in the church. And I went to bed, I got up the next morning, went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My eye was not red, not swollen, not drooping, no pain. He said, I could see, but it wasn't perfectly clear. And I said to my wife, do you think it's better, or am I just hoping? And she said, you better go back to that doctor in Indianapolis. When he said, I went back to the specialist in Indianapolis. He looked at my records, and then he'd look at me, And then he'd look at the records, and he'd look at me, and he said, well, tell me, have you seen the doctor that did your original surgery since you saw me the last time? And he said, no. And he said, well, what did you do? He said, I prayed. And he said, well, you don't need a cornea transplant. And he said, there's just a small piece of scar tissue. And he reached in and pulled it out. And this man now has 20/20 vision. And he has worn glasses since he's 7 years old.
Boy, what a beautiful story. And to be able to document that when you presented your case to the Vatican to raise the status in the eyes of the Church of the founder of the Sisters of Providence, Mother Theodore Guerin.
That was the second miracle. And so that one had to go through the same process. I had to find 8 witnesses and 2 doctors who knew nothing about the case. And these 8 witnesses had to all go to Indianapolis to testify before the Metropolitan Tribunal, a canon lawyer, 2 canon lawyers, and another doctor had to listen to the testimony of each of these 9 persons, 8 witnesses and the doctor. And after they listened, they would give the reports one at a time, and then they'd leave. And before they left, the women who had tape recorded it had to type up what they had said, submit it to them, and they had to sign it and say, yes, this is what I said, before they could leave. So it's all done very, very systematically and legally. That's the process.
Sister Marie Kevin, a long and complicated story, but you women of the order there, the Sisters of Providence, stuck with it for over a century and came out vindicated in proving that the woman who founded your order is indeed in heaven. Thanks again.
Well, I'm glad to, and I hope you're going to come visit us sometime.
The second half of this interview is also posted here on YouTube. I'm Dennis Daly.